June 17, 1944. 0540 hours. Northern outskirts of Cannes, France. A cold gray sunrise settled over shattered stone blocks, blown roofs, and the twisted steel bones of barns and workshops. The Normandy fighting had entered its most suffocating phase. Every street was a maze of collapsed walls and hidden firing positions. German machine gun crews turned ordinary alleys into killing funnels. Snipers shifted from attic vents to broken rafters with quiet precision. Allied forces moved meter by meter. Casualty reports rose each day. Maps that looked simple in headquarters turned into unpredictable death traps on the ground. This was an environment where improvisation meant survival and rigid doctrine meant waste. Sergeant Elias Thorne crouched behind a half-collapsed wagon frame and studied the entrance to a narrow lane that locals once called Rue du Moulin. The men called it Death's Alley now. He had already watched 3 attack attempts fail here. Each time, a German MG-42 positioned behind a reinforced doorway swept the approach with a storm of fire. The rounds punched through plaster, brick, and the edges of stone. Anyone who tried to cross the open gap got cut down in seconds. The squad leaders knew the problem. They knew the angles. They knew the timing. None of it mattered. The enemy held the advantage with a tool that turned ordinary corners into execution sites. Thorne wiped dust from his brow and thought about the farm he grew up on in rural Iowa. Before the war, his work revolved around machinery that never followed the rules. A grain auger that jammed at the wrong moment. A combined chute that buckled under uneven weight. A tractor carburetor that needed a specific twist to stay steady during harvest. Years of repairs had shaped him. He learned to think around problems, not through them. He respected force, but he respected protection even more. When a machine could be modified to keep someone safe, he modified it. When a chute could redirect the flow of 100 pounds of grain and prevent a worker from losing a hand, he rebuilt it. That habit never left him. Urban combat pushed that instinct into sharper focus. Direct fire meant direct risk. Enemy fire zones overlapped in ways few commanders could anticipate. Streets punishingly narrow. Corners that opened into sudden crossfire. Attics with small holes drilled through beams. The Germans defended Cannes with layers of prepared positions. Thorne saw men die in places where no doctrine had answers. The manuals described fields, hedgerows, and trenches. They did not describe stairwells that collapsed under weight or machine gun nests shielded by rubble that absorbed shock from grenades. He watched Private Collins move closer to the mouth of Death's Alley. The younger soldier tried to find a blind spot in the enemy coverage. He leaned slightly to the right. A short burst crackled from the hidden MG-42. A line of dust leapt from the wall near his face. Collins slid back behind cover, shaken but unhurt. The squad had used up smoke rounds earlier in the morning. They had no tanks nearby. The next attempt would cost lives unless they changed the angle of approach. Lieutenant Barker stepped beside Thorne. Barker trusted numbers, lines, and textbook geometry. He studied the lane through binoculars and shook his head. He muttered that they needed artillery, but the radios crackled with delays. The guns were tied to another operation south of the river. Air support could not fly because low clouds rolled in from the coast. Barker repeated the hours-old plan. The squad would rush the corner again. Someone would suppress. Someone would flank. It would be costly. Thorne knew what that meant. He stared at a long piece of bent sheet metal lying among the rubble. Its curved shape once formed part of a barn's grain chute. He recognized the design immediately. It reminded him of home. The curve could redirect weight or force if used right. He thought about the distance from their position to the alley corner. He thought about the length of the bar and the M1919 the squad carried. He thought about the problem. They did not need more firepower. They needed a way to fire without exposing a torso, shoulder, or face to the MG-42. Protection mattered more than strength in a narrow street. During the previous night, Thorne had started quietly shaping an idea. He found scrap pipes, a bracket from a broken wagon axle, and the curved chute panel. He worked behind a collapsed doorway with a small toolkit he carried in his pack. He hammered dents back into place. He aligned angles through trial, error, and instinct trained by years of repairing machinery. He created a sliding mount that let a weapon extend past a wall without the gunner leaning into danger. It was crude metal. It looked like farm junk. But it worked in basic function. He called it the grain chute firing slide. He did not show it to anyone yet. Men were too tired for theories. Officers were too rigid for improvisation. The army did not reward ideas from sergeants who built devices out of scrap. But Thorne could not watch another attempt fail. He had seen the casualties on this street. He had watched men he respected fall for 2 meters of progress. Death came fast in Cannes. Many soldiers lost their lives before seeing the problem clearly. Barker noticed Thorne holding the metal assembly. He frowned. The lieutenant asked what it was supposed to be. Thorne explained the concept in plain mechanical terms. Barker dismissed it as a distraction. He said it looked unprofessional. He said the squad needed discipline, not gadgets. Thorne did not argue. He waited. He knew the next failed assault would force a change. War punished stubbornness. It rewarded any idea that reduced losses no matter how odd it looked. The squad prepared for another push. Thorne watched their movements. He watched their hesitation. Collins checked his helmet strap again. Private Rosen whispered a short prayer. Corporal Hensley loaded belts for the M1919 with a steady hand that trembled at the fingers. Everyone knew the MG42 would fire again the moment they stepped into that open gap. The lane was too narrow for a spread. Too short for a retreat. Too well defended for a sprint. Thorne stepped forward before Barker could give the order. He carried the grain chute firing slide under one arm. He positioned it at the corner of the stone wall. He braced the curved chute against the ground. His hands moved with calm confidence. He had installed parts on harvesters in storms that rattled his bones. He had repaired machines under weight that could crush a man. This was not new pressure. This was familiar work. He set the M1919 into the mount. The chute extended the weapon's barrel around the corner by just enough distance to cover the lane. Thorne instructed Collins to feed the belt. Collins hesitated but obeyed. The others watched silently. The device looked crude but the concept was clear. A protected firing angle meant the MG42 would not see a target until bullets already moved. Barker raised a hand in frustration. He started to object. Then a single rifle crack echoed from a hidden German sniper. A round snapped past the squad and shattered a stone chip near Barker's head. That was enough to silence his protest. He ordered Thorne to proceed. Thorne gripped the trigger assembly. He leaned only enough to see the alignment marks he had scratched into the chute for aim correction. He fired a short burst. The burst left the chute with a harsh metallic roar that echoed through the ruined alley. The weapon stayed steady inside the improvised slide. The recoil rippled through the curved metal instead of through Thorne's shoulder and ribs. Dust lifted from shattered walls. The sound pattern changed within a second. The German MG42 answered with a violent, sweeping burst. Its lethal line tore across the lane, but it struck only stone. No Allied torso leaned into view. No helmet edge showed. The enemy gunners fired at an empty corner. Their weapon barked again in confusion as they tried to track a target that never appeared. Thorne fired a second burst. This time he adjusted the angle by shifting the slide half an inch along the ground. The chute worked like a redirection channel. It fed the weapon's muzzle into the street with precision that felt familiar from his farm work. He had often built grain guides to avoid spills while loading trucks during harvest. The same principle applied here. A redirected path. A controlled output. The Germans were not prepared for a machine gun that appeared only as fire, not as a body behind cover. Collins watched in disbelief. He saw brick fragments explode around the reinforced doorway that hid the MG42. Thorne's fire forced the gunners to duck. The squad saw something they had not seen all week. Suppression. Real suppression. The enemy did not dominate the angle for the first time in days. Corporal Hensley leaned forward, stunned by the possibility that the lane was no longer a guaranteed death zone. Another German sniper attempted a shot from the second floor of a building opposite the alley. The bullet clipped the metal chute, sparks leaping outward. Thorne did not flinch. The impact did not change the alignment. The chute was thick enough to absorb minor hits. Years of modifying metal equipment gave Thorne an instinct for thickness, weight, and reinforcement. He trusted the build. Barker stepped beside Thorne with a look that mixed annoyance, admiration, and disbelief. He whispered that they had a narrow window. The MG42 crew would relocate if left unchallenged for too long. He ordered Rosen and Hensley to prepare grenades. They nodded and stayed low while Thorne continued controlled bursts. Each short volley pinned the Germans long enough for the squad to move closer. The enemy tried to shift tactics. A second MG42 opened from a balcony deeper in the street. Its arc of fire usually dominated the right side of the approach. This time it scattered uselessly along broken pavement because the primary gun position was already suppressed. The lane had changed shape. One threatened corner collapsed into disadvantage for the defenders. The Germans expected predictable movement. They did not expect a weapon firing from a hidden curve. Thorne kept the burst short. Long bursts would overheat the weapon, and the chute's metal would amplify the heat. His mind balanced mechanical constraints with tactical needs. He adjusted elevation by sliding thin rubble under the front bracket. Collins fed the belt with steady tension. Rosen counted down on his fingers from 15 to time grenade movement with the bursts. Barker breathed faster as he watched an impossible shift take form. The squad advanced. They moved 6 meters. Then 9. Then 12. No one had reached that distance all morning. The last attempt stalled at 3 meters. The one before had ended with 2 men dead before they fired a shot. Now the squad inched forward with purpose. The MG-42 could not risk firing blind while suppressed. Its gunners waited for a body to appear. None did. Thorne fired again. The chute vibrated but held. The barrel extended far enough around the corner to hit the defensive doorway directly. Plaster burst outward. A German cry echoed between stone walls. Rosen and Hensley sprinted to a new piece of cover. They crouched behind a collapsed animal trough and prepared grenades. A sudden shout in German echoed from inside the fortified room. It was a command to shift weapon position. Thorne recognized the tone. He fired another burst to interrupt the move. The M1919 rattled with mechanical certainty. The belt slid cleanly. Collins kept his focus sharp. Each ejected casing clattered across the ground, forming a small pile behind the chute. Rosen signaled. Thorne eased off the trigger. Silence filled the lane for a breath. That silence was enough. Rosen and Hensley rose together. They hurled 2 grenades through the broken doorway. One clattered against the threshold. One rolled deeper into the room. The detonations hit with a thundering dual blast. Smoke poured outward. A trail of blackened dust drifted across the opening. Thorne fired a short follow-up burst. When the smoke cleared, the MG-42 was silent. No return fire. No movement. The primary threat of Death's Alley had collapsed. Barker gave a quick order. The squad advanced in a tight line. They moved past the corner and into the lane itself. They scanned windows, door frames, shattered carts, and broken masonry. Thorne kept the chute and weapon positioned at ready angle. His presence meant they could sweep the alley without exposing themselves to long angles. The balcony machine gun team reacted next. They opened fire in a panic from the upper level. Their rounds cut a wild pattern across the street, searching for moving bodies. Thorne swung the chute toward them by dragging the metal base across the cobblestones. The curved guide amplified the turn. The weapon snapped into the new direction. Thorne fired upward. His round struck the balcony's wooden flooring. Splinters flew outward. One burst forced the German crew to fall back into the room behind them. Hensley and Collins sprinted forward to secure the lower floor of the structure. Barker followed cautiously. The squad entered the building from the ground level. The balcony gun team realized their escape route was gone. They attempted to retreat across the upper corridor. Thorne fired another controlled burst from below through a broken window frame. His rounds traced the wall where footsteps echoed. One German fell. The other fled deeper into the building. Thorne held his fire. He did not waste ammunition. He adjusted the chute angle by tapping a wedge of stone under the metal frame. The weapon stayed steady, ready to fire again if needed. Barker signaled for Hensley and Collins to clear the upper room. They found the MG-42 still warm. They found blood on the floor. They found the second gunner unconscious near a broken beam. The resistance on the balcony collapsed. Thorne remained on the street. His eyes tracked every corner. The chute gave him the confidence to cover angles previously impossible. His squad moved deeper into the lane. For the first time since sunrise, they controlled Death's Alley. Behind them, other sections of the platoon advanced. The shift in pressure was immediate. One broken street had slowed the whole platoon for hours. Clearing it changed momentum for the entire push toward the industrial quarter. Officers noticed. Radio chatter changed tone. Someone asked what modified weapon was supporting the advance. Barker answered without hesitation. He said it was an improvised redirection device built by Sergeant Thorne. Word spread through the nearby squads. A farm mechanic had built something that worked. Something that kept men alive. Something the manuals never mentioned. By late morning, clouds thickened above the rooftops. The industrial quarter loomed ahead with concrete workshops and narrow corridors filled with debris. The squad regrouped inside a roofless stable that smelled of smoke and damp soil. Barker reviewed the next objective. They needed to clear a second street that connected to the rail depot. Reports said multiple machine gun nests waited there. Snipers had been spotted near the upper windows of a bakery. No unit had made progress in that direction since dawn. The platoon needed momentum, and Thorne's device had provided the first breakthrough of the day. Collins knelt beside the grain chute firing slide. He touched the metal with cautious respect. He had never seen anything like it. The weld points looked rough but intentional. The curvature had a mathematical feel, even though Thorne built it without any tools for measurement. When Collins asked how Thorne knew the angle would hold, the sergeant explained that grain chutes must manage force flow. If the angle is wrong, the chute vibrates, binds, or spills. If the angle is right, everything moves smoothly. He used the same idea here. Redirect force with control. Avoid waste. Protect the user. Rosen brought a metal canteen and tapped the chute with his knuckles. He asked Thorne if the device could handle more recoil. Thorne nodded. The chute had survived direct hits from a sniper round. It had absorbed heat and friction. It had stayed stable during repositioning. He said the only danger came from overheating the barrel inside the guide. Short bursts were essential. Precision over volume. The squad understood. They had just seen the payoff for restraint. Barker approached with a map. He pointed to a long corridor of buildings that formed the next critical street. It ran between two collapsed warehouses. At the far end sat a small open square where German infantry had placed overlapping firing positions. The alley leading to it was narrower than Death's Alley. The angles were tighter. Thorne studied the drawing carefully. His mind mapped the metal chute around corners, adjusting alignment with simple shifts. He visualized every ricochet risk. He asked if there were side doors or cellar entrances. Barker confirmed there were at least 4 possible enemy hideouts along the street. Thorne said the chute worked best with clear lines of fire and immediate hard cover. Barker agreed and said the squad could use a ruined stone archway as the next primary firing point. Collins inspected the archway from a distance and confirmed it had no clean shot without exposing the gunner. Thorne looked at the structure. He saw worn stone, chipped pillars, and loose brick that could crumble under fire. He tapped the chute against the ground and nodded. The device could turn the archway into a strong point. The squad left the stable and moved slowly toward their new position. The sound of distant artillery rolled like low thunder across Cannes. Smoke drifted above rooftops. German rifle cracks echoed through tight passages. The platoon advanced in staggered lines, each man scanning windows, doors, and rafters. When they reached the archway, Thorne immediately inspected the foundation stones. He looked for stable surfaces. He found 2 flat blocks where the chute could rest. He positioned the metal curve along the left pillar and checked the alignment using the scratched reference marks he carved earlier. Collins fed a fresh belt into the M1919. The others prepared to advance as soon as Thorne opened fire. Before anyone moved, a German sniper fired from the bakery window. His bullet struck a broken wooden beam above Thorne's head. Splinters rained down. Barker swore under his breath. Thorne did not react. His fingers tightened on the trigger assembly. His eyes tracked the movement in the upper floor. He adjusted the chute 2 inches to the right by sliding a loose brick under the rear bracket. He fired a controlled burst. The rounds punched through the window frame. The sniper fell backward in silence. The squad moved into the new street. The air grew thick with dust. Shattered shutters swung in the wind. A German machine gun opened from a doorframe 20 meters ahead. Its angle would have been unbeatable without the chute. The rounds hammered the stone archway, sending chips flying. Thorne leaned into the firing slide and returned fire. His burst struck the structure directly. The MG crew ducked out of position. Thorne's fire pinned them down. Rosen and Hensley sprinted toward a broken wall on the right side of the street. Collins followed with disciplined steps. They moved quickly, trusting the suppression. Each second mattered. Every meter gained reduced the enemy's advantage. The German crew attempted to adjust position again. Thorne saw movement and fired 2 short bursts. He directed rounds along the doorframe and into the far interior wall. He did not need a clear target. He only needed to control their ability to fire. He forced them into survival mode. A pinned crew cannot maintain accuracy or coordination. Barker signaled to advance. Thorne shifted the chute. He pulled the metal assembly along the stones until it found the next angle. The curve allowed the weapon to pivot without exposing Thorne's arms or head. He opened fire again. His rounds shattered a crate the German gunners used as partial cover. The crate exploded into fragments. The squad pushed deeper. They were halfway down the street now. No previous attempt had reached this point all week. The enemy had expected a frontal assault. They did not expect a weapon that changed angles with mechanical ease. A second German MG team appeared in the upper floor of a warehouse. They aimed downward, ready to fire directly at Rosen's position. Rosen had no cover. Before the Germans could fire, Thorne reacted with instinct and calculation. He dragged the chute another few inches across the stones. The curve guided the muzzle upward. He fired a sharp burst. His rounds tore across the warehouse opening. One German gunner fell from the recoil impact. The second ducked behind a beam and crawled away. Thorn fired again. Wooden supports shattered. The enemy crew did not return fire. Rosen shouted that the right side of the street was clear. Hensley signaled that the left approach remained under fire. Thorn kept his weapon trained on the upper floor. Collins prepared the next belt. Barker and the remaining riflemen moved forward, using the suppression to reach a series of crates stacked near the rail depot wall. The Germans grew desperate. A grenade rolled from the doorway of the first machine gun nest. It bounced across the street toward Thorn's position. Collins saw it too late. Thorn did not move. He kept firing. Barker shouted for everyone to get down. Collins dove behind the archway. The grenade detonated in a violent blast that shook the street. Stones cracked. Dust shot upward. The shockwave passed through the chute and rattled the metal, but the structure held. When the dust settled, Thorn resumed firing. His bursts were calculated. He shifted angles with practiced control. The enemy gun nest fell silent. The squad advanced again. The street opened into the small square ahead. This was the final obstacle before the rail depot. Thorn repositioned the chute for the last push. The Germans still had one remaining strongpoint. Its angle covered the entire square. Without a flank route, the squad needed an improvised solution. They had one. Thorn prepared to use the chute for an angle previous units believed impossible. The squad reached the final bend before the square. The air felt heavier here, thick with chalk dust and the dry smell of shattered masonry. Every sound echoed with unnerving clarity. The German strongpoint ahead controlled the entire open area. No one had crossed it since the previous night. The position sat behind a reinforced stone barrier built into the front of an old workshop. A tripod-mounted MG-42 covered the square with a perfect field of fire. Two riflemen watched the flanks from upper windows. Any movement into the open meant instant death. Barker studied the layout through narrowed eyes. He knew the situation. A frontal push would tear the squad apart. Grenades could not reach the crew. Snipers could not see them. Air support was grounded. Artillery remained committed elsewhere. The position had survived 4 separate attempts from 3 different squads. The defenders held absolute advantage through angle and elevation. Barker whispered that this was the hardest strongpoint he had seen west of the Orne River. Thorn crouched near the corner and looked at the streets feeding into the square. The geometry felt oppressive. Everything converged into a narrow kill zone. The defenders had prepared for British, Canadian, and American advances. They expected textbook tactics. They expected smoke, frontal pressure, and short dashes between cover. What they did not expect was a firing source that did not expose the shooter. Thorn set the grain chute firing slide on the ground. He checked the curvature for damage. A dent from earlier fighting had warped the left edge slightly, but not enough to compromise alignment. He ran his thumb along the metal, feeling for heat. He tested the weld tension. His hands moved with the calm of a mechanic inspecting a combined belt after a long harvest day. He knew the chute's limits better than anyone. If the burst length stayed controlled, it would hold. Collins fed in a fresh belt. He asked Thorn if the chute could take one more engagement. Thorn nodded and placed a small cobblestone under the rear bracket to raise the muzzle by a few degrees. He scratched a quick alignment mark with the edge of a spent casing. Barker asked how he intended to get a firing angle into the square without stepping into the open. Thorn tapped the chute. He said the curve would handle the angle. They only needed to find the right anchor point. The right anchor point was a broken section of wall that formed part of a collapsed bakery. The wall stood at an odd angle, leaning inward as if frozen mid-fall. A narrow gap at its base allowed a muzzle to enter the square from near ground level. It was a terrible angle for any shoulder-fired weapon. No soldier could lie in that position without exposing their body. But a redirected muzzle could rest there easily. The squad moved closer. Rosen checked the bakery for potential ambushes. Hensley cleared loose debris. Barker ordered the others to hold back and prepare to advance once suppression began. Thorn reached the broken wall and positioned the chute. He angled the curve so the muzzle pointed through the narrow gap. The view through the gap showed only a small section of the square, but it was enough. The German MG-42 sat behind a stone barrier with sandbags stacked waist-high. The gunner scanned the square with steady motion. Thorn saw the top of the weapon's receiver. He saw the assistant gunner feeding a belt. He saw how confident they were in the kill zone they controlled. He adjusted the chute one more time, moving it a precise inch to the left. his reference marks aligned. Collins knelt beside him, ready with the belt. The rest of the squad waited behind the bakery wall. Barker crouched close enough to see the setup. He whispered that if this worked, they would break the strongest defensive point of the entire block. Thorne placed his hands on the trigger assembly. He inhaled slowly. His breathing steadied. He fired the first burst. The rounds shot into the square at a low, unexpected vector. The Germans reacted instantly but with confusion. Their MG-42 gunner turned toward the angle of impact. He looked for a shooter above ground level. He found none. He looked for a muzzle flash. He saw none. Thorne fired again. His rounds tore across the sandbags and kicked a spray of dirt into the gunner's face. The MG-42 crew fired back blindly. Their rounds struck the bakery wall, the ground, the square's far corner, everything except the chute's hidden position. Thorne fired a third burst. This one struck the assistant gunner directly. The man fell sideways behind the barrier. The lead gunner yelled for support. His voice echoed in the confined space. Rosen signaled that the riflemen in the upper windows were searching for targets. They scanned the square but could not locate the source of fire. They expected a visible shooter. Thorne gave them none. The MG-42 team attempted to reposition. The gunner tried to drag the weapon to a new angle while shouting directions to unseen allies. Thorne shifted the chute half an inch, using a flat piece of stone to elevate the front. He fired again. His rounds hit the barrier and cut splinters from the wooden frame beneath the sandbags. The Germans had no answer. The firing slide turned the square into a field controlled by invisible force. Barker gave the order to move. Hensley and Collins advanced first. They sprinted to a demolished cart near the square's edge. Rosen took the right flank. Barker followed with methodical movement. Thorne continued firing short bursts, guiding the weapon through the chute with precise corrections. His fire pinned the Germans down. The riflemen in the windows ducked as bullets struck the beams near them. The MG-42 gunner attempted to raise his weapon again, but Thorne saw the movement. He fired a clean burst. The gunner fell backward behind the stone barrier. The squad pushed into the square. The defenders were trapped behind their own fortifications. Their angles worked against them. Their defensive design assumed they would see incoming fire. They did not. Rosen reached the barrier first. He threw a grenade behind the sandbags. The explosion shook dust into the air. Hensley climbed over the barrier with Collins close behind. They found the MG-42 disabled. 2 German infantrymen lay wounded. The others had fled deeper into the workshop, leaving behind crates of ammunition. Barker confirmed the strongpoint was neutralized. He radioed the platoon. For the first time all day, the path to the rail depot opened fully. The shift in momentum echoed through command channels. Platoon leaders asked how the square had been taken. Barker repeated the answer he had given earlier. He said Sergeant Thorne used an improvised mechanical firing slide to control angles impossible for conventional tactics. Thorne stood near the bakery wall and exhaled slowly. He lifted the grain chute. The metal felt hot. He studied the dents, scratches, and dried dust coating its surface. The device had reached its limits. The curve held. The welds held. The idea held. Collins stepped beside him and whispered that the chute had saved the entire squad. Thorne nodded. They moved toward the workshop to clear the final resistance. The square belonged to them now. The strongest position of the day had fallen because a farm mechanic used a simple idea to bend the rules of urban warfare. The workshop interior stretched out. Like a maze of toppled shelving, metal frames, and broken machinery. Thick shadows filled every corner. German infantry had withdrawn into this final stronghold to regroup. The squad advanced with controlled steps, rifles raised, breaths tight. Thorne stayed near the entrance with the grain chute firing slide resting against a collapsed beam. He no longer needed the device for the close-quarters fight, but he refused to leave it behind. It had become a tool of survival. Tools deserved respect. Barker signaled for Rosen and Hensley to move left. Collins and Private Ward took the right. Thorne stayed centered behind Barker. The squad proceeded through a narrow passage lined with shattered equipment. The Germans fired sporadic shots from deeper inside the workshop. The bullets clanged off metal and cracked against crates. Thorne's instincts flared. He studied the ricochet patterns. He saw how the shots bounced. He noticed where the angles converged. He understood the geometry of danger. A sudden burst of German fire echoed from the far end of the second chamber. Collins dove behind a steel cart. Rosen dropped flat and returned fire toward the muzzle flashes. Barker pressed himself against a concrete pillar and assessed the position. The defenders held a platform built from old workshop tables. Their elevation gave them an advantage. They waited for the squad to step into a funnel of fire. Thorn saw the shape of the trap instantly. The tables formed a narrow V that channeled movement toward the center. Anyone advancing would enter a zone where German rifles had full visibility. Thorn motioned to Barker and pointed at a small opening near the base of a storage furnace. The space was barely wide enough for a man to crawl through, but it led directly behind the elevated platform. Barker understood the plan immediately. He ordered Rosen and Hensley to lay down suppressive fire. The two riflemen opened up with steady shots. The Germans ducked behind the tables. Barker signaled Collins and Ward to move through the furnace gap. They crawled quietly, using the noise from the rifle exchange to mask their movement. Thorn watched the path, timing their progress by the echoes. The Germans tried to reassert control. One soldier leaned out to fire down the central chamber. Thorn reacted instantly. He raised his rifle and fired a clean shot. The German fell behind the table. Rosen and Hensley shifted fire to keep the remaining defenders pinned. Collins and Ward emerged behind the platform. They climbed silently and leveled their rifles. Collins shouted for the Germans to surrender. Two dropped their weapons. One attempted to reach for a grenade. Ward fired a single round that stopped him. The last defender raised his hands. Barker moved forward and ordered them to secure the prisoners. The workshop fell quiet. Only the distant rumble of artillery rolled through the industrial quarter now. The squad regrouped near the platform. Barker's expression shifted from battlefield focus to exhausted relief. He told Thorn that the Chute had made every advance possible. Without it, they would have lost half the squad before reaching the square. Collins nodded and said the Chute had changed how they saw urban angles. Thorn did not respond immediately. He studied the device. Its edges were worn. The metal dented. The weld near the base had cracked slightly. He felt the heat still radiating from the curve. He knew the Chute had reached its mechanical limit. He also knew it had served its purpose. It had allowed them to fight without stepping blindly into death. It had given them a tool doctrine never considered. The platoon advanced into the rail depot by noon. The enemy withdrew to the southern edge of Cannes. The industrial quarter, once an impenetrable barrier, now lay under Allied control. Commanders walked the cleared streets and counted fewer casualties than expected. They asked how the square had been taken so quickly. Barker explained the firing slide again. Officers inspected the device. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Some scribbled notes. Some took measurements of the curvature. None had ever seen anything like it. Engineers later sketched a diagram and attempted to replicate the concept with spare materials. Their versions lacked Thorn's instinctive shaping and improvised precision. They worked but not as smoothly. Still, the idea spread. A few squads in neighboring blocks built similar chutes. The concept saved lives in at least 2 more engagements. Word reached battalion level. Reports mentioned an improvised redirection mechanism used in close-quarters urban fighting. It was a small line in a large document, but it carried weight. Thorn never asked for recognition. He spent the afternoon repairing a damaged water pump near the depot. He helped Collins align a jammed bolt on his rifle. He reinforced a cracked support beam inside a temporary field shelter. His hands stayed busy. His focus stayed practical. Barker approached him and said an officer requested his presence for a commendation discussion. Thorn declined politely. He said there were tasks that needed doing. Barker insisted. Thorn still refused. He understood war. Innovations born on the battlefield rarely got formal credit. But they mattered to the men who survived because of them. Collins told him quietly that the Chute had saved his life twice. Rosen said the same. Hensley called it the smartest piece of metal he had ever seen. That was enough. Days later, when Cannes finally fell, the squad spread out across new assignments. The grain chute firing slide stayed behind in the workshop. The metal had warped too much for reuse. Thorn placed it on a table where sunlight passed through a cracked roof tile. Dust settled slowly over it. He touched the curved surface one last time before leaving. After the war, Thorn returned to Iowa. He rebuilt the family farm with calm determination. He repaired tractors, refurbished grain silos, and replaced old chutes with stronger, cleaner ones. Neighbors trusted him with their machinery. They said he had a mechanic's hands and a soldier's patience. He never spoke about Cannes. He never described the firing slide. He saw no need. The war stayed with him in memory, not in conversation. His squad mates remembered. Collins told new recruits about the day a simple piece of curved metal broke the strongest strong point in the industrial quarter. Rosen mentioned it during a reunion years later. Hensley kept a small sketch of the chute in a notebook. Barker included a brief reference in a post-war report. It read that a farm mechanic used his civilian knowledge to create a battlefield innovation that saved lives and shifted momentum in one of the most difficult urban fights of the Normandy campaign. History absorbed the event quietly. The firing slide never made it into official manuals. It never appeared in museums. It was a tool built for a specific moment under impossible pressure. But its impact lived in the men who survived. They knew the truth. A simple curve of metal had rewritten the geometry of danger. Thorne lived out the rest of his life with steady hands and quiet purpose. He kept his tools organized. He built efficient chutes that guided grain with perfect flow. He believed that good machinery protected people. And that belief saved his squad. His story remained a footnote in the vast machinery of war. But the footnote carried weight. One soldier's idea changed. A street changed a square and changed the cost of a battle measured in men's lives.